The old world is certainly no land of milk and honey. Poverty, hunger, and rigid social structures drive many to desperate measures. Some turn toward the dark powers, while others devote themselves to forces no one would ever expect to find worshipped by men. Hi, I'm Werner from the Ratcatcher Tales channel, where we dive deep into the Warhammer fantasy lore. Today, we'll be taking a closer look at those among humanity who decide to serve the Horned Rat. Within the pantheon of the Old World's gods, there is a deity for almost everyone. Shalia will tend to your wounds, Ulrich and Myrmidia each strengthen warriors in their own way. Sigmar stands as a pillar of the Empire, while Tal and Rhea bless the land with game and bountiful harvest. Yet life is never so simple, and not every inhabitant of the Old World enjoys status, wealth, or even the basic means to survive. It is for this very reason that some abandon the gods of men, casting longing eyes towards the dark powers, whose followers often conceal their true intentions behind promises to solve the very real hardships that plague the world. Yet the secret cults of chaos are far from the only organizations eager to take in desperate souls and exploit them for their own ends. Today, we'll be looking at those men who, willingly or otherwise, chose to betray their own kind and throw in their lot with the Skaven. Yes. At first glance, it might seem unthinkable that any human would willingly aid the Ratmen in their twisted schemes to conquer the world. Yet reality, even in a fictional setting like Warhammer, is rarely so simple, and people have an unfortunate habit of acting against their own best interests. The reason people join cults are as varied as the number of cultists themselves. Some are driven by the promise of quick wealth, others by frustrated ambition, simple spite, or unwavering ideology. Whatever the motive, such weaknesses are eagerly exploited by human agents of the Horned Rat, who are always ready to welcome a lost soul and offer it a new purpose, to gnaw away, piece by piece, at the very foundations of human civilization. But for human cults devoted to the Skaven to exist at all, there must first be a grey area in which the Ratmen and the folk of the surface can interact, and do so without every encounter ending in bloodshed. As it happens, the history of the Warhammer world offers no shortage of such opportunities. Of them all, perhaps the most consequential was the Skaven's decision, millennia ago, to free and arm King Alcadizar, allowing him to accomplish what he already longed to do himself: slay Nagash at the height of his power and avenge the destruction of living Nehekhara. Not every instance of cooperation between men and Skaven, however, carried stakes quite so monumental. Far more often, their paths crossed simply because, for a brief moment, their lesser ambitions happened to align. The lore offers no shortage of such examples. Toward the end of the 24th century imperial calendar, Prince Karsten of Waldenhof in Sylvania hired Skaven to help him seize the fortress of a rival. When he refused to pay for their services, the Ratmen abducted his children. A more recent example is Fritz von Hallstatt, the former head of Nuln's secret police. His obsession with rooting out mutants within the city eventually led him to rely on information supplied by the Skaven themselves, accurate at first, but gradually twisted to serve whatever conclusions the Ratmen wished him to reach. It ended disastrously for Nuln, which suffered greatly when the Skaven eventually launched their assault upon the city. An assault whose exact date, incidentally, shifts by as much as 15 years depending on which edition of the lore one follows. Very well, you might ask, but how does one even make contact with a Ratman? After all, in the Old World, even criminals are far more likely to attack a giant, two-legged rat than attempt to bargain with it. And that brings us to the true subject of today's episode, the human cults devoted to the Skaven, which serve as intermediaries between the two worlds, the Under-Empire below and the realm of mankind above. So where do these intermediaries come from? Some are simply the unfortunate souls who had the misfortune of being captured by the Skaven. Not every human dragged into the Under Empire as a slave dies in the warpstone mines, escapes only to spend the rest of their days as a broken madman in one of Shalia's hospices, or simply vanishes without a trace. Some choose to survive at any cost, and survival demands proving one's usefulness to the Ratman masters. In time, a number of these captives adopt Skaven customs and mannerisms. If fortune favors them, they may even be sent back to the surface with a new purpose, to spy among humanity on behalf of their true Skaven masters and carry out whatever tasks they are given. There are not many recorded examples of such groups, but the one we do have strongly suggests that they are far from unique. One such organization, known as the Yellow Bellies, operates in Ubersreik under the leadership of a charismatic Baut who was abducted as a child and raised to become a loyal servant of the Skaven. Under his command, the gang's primary tasks are gathering intelligence on events within the city and arranging the disappearances of people unlikely to be missed, travelers for example. His profession proves especially useful in this regard as it brings him into regular contact with outsiders who can be led from taverns to Ubersreik's brothels. Should they happen to lose consciousness after being slipped one substance or another along the way, so much the better. The Yellow Bellies serve clan Slikit, one of the lesser Skaven clans. Though relatively small, the clan fulfills an important role by transporting goods throughout the Under Empire via its vast network of underground rivers and canals. As a result, its presence extends beneath other cities as well, including, but not limited to, Aldorf and Delberts. And it's almost certainly not the only clan willing to employ corrupted humans in its endless struggles against rival clans and for many other purposes besides. After all, the life of a single Skaven is cheap, and the life of a human traitor is even cheaper. The Skaven's use of such agents is particularly dangerous because, in the old world, no one has yet described what we would call the Stockholm Syndrome. Even in lands where the existence of the Ratman is openly acknowledged, the idea that organized groups of former Skaven slaves might willingly continue serving their captors comes as a profound shock. More learned folk in places like Taelia are well aware that the Skaven occasionally carry off human slaves, yet they pray only for those unfortunate to find a swift death. Few can even imagine that someone might betray their own kind and countrymen, choosing instead to serve those who once enslaved and tormented them. Such people may, at least, evoke a measure of pity. Very different, however, are the cults that actively seek to hasten the collapse of the old world civilization, convinced that once the Skaven inherit the world, they themselves will be rewarded with power and privilege as overseers of the conquered human population, or at the very least, spared the fate that awaits everyone else. Some members of these cults openly worship the Horned Rat. Humans, however, perceive the Horned Rat rather differently than the Skaven do. Rather than being merely the cruel patron of Skaven kind, the Horned Rat is seen as a deity who not only punishes disobedience, but also rewards those humans who prove themselves worthy in his eyes. In truth, the Skaven make little distinction between one human and another. But if some among mankind are willing to further their schemes out of ideological conviction, so much the better. To the Ratman, such people are little more than expendable tools, a kind of icebreaker, to borrow Viktor Suvorov's metaphor, meant to shatter the foundations of human society before ultimately being discarded themselves. One such cult known to play an active role in this task is the cult of the Yellow Fang. As an aside, if you are wondering why the color yellow appears yet again in this context, you're not alone. My own suspicion is that it draws upon the symbolism of the color yellow once carried in medieval Europe, where it was associated with hypocrisy, deceit, betrayal and sin. Whatever the reason, the cult of the Yellow Fang has existed in the old world for a remarkably long time. And I don't simply mean that some of its members have already been raised in families where both parents belong to the cult, although at least one such case is known. No, the cult is far older than merely 2 generations. The earliest traces of its existence date back to the first half of the 24th century imperial calendar, nearly 200 years before the events of the 4th edition of the role-playing game. From that period comes a book known as Rattus Rex Conspiratus, supposedly written by one of the Yellow Fang's own members. Much of it is said to consist of conversations between the author and the mysterious Skaven, who allegedly revealed many of his race secrets because he opposed the Council of 13, which, incidentally, at that time undergone perhaps the greatest transformation in its history. How much of this account is true and why a Skaven would oppose a council presided over, in a sense, by the Horned Rat himself, is impossible to say. What is certain, however, is that Skaven politics are extraordinarily complex, and despite their centuries of contact with the Ratman, even the leaders of the cult of the Yellow Fang understand only a fraction of it. Yet that has not stopped them from trying to take part in those intrigues, or at least convincing themselves that they can. Over time, the cult, whose cells have operated in places such as Karlburg, Altdorf, Marienburg, Midenheim, Bogenhafen, and even Thalia, split into two competing factions with very different visions of the Yellow Fang's ultimate purpose. The first believes that resistance against the Skaven is utterly futile and that mankind's only sensible course is to help them seize control of the surface. Very much a resistance is futile philosophy. The second faction broadly agrees that opposing the Skaven is hopeless and that they should indeed be aided in conquering the world, but only so they can eventually be betrayed, allowing the cult itself to seize power and rule over both humanity and the Skavendom alike. After all, what greater display of cunning could there be in the eyes of the Horned Rat? Besides, Emperor Mandred's Skaven Slayer proved long ago that humans are far superior than Ratmen. The differences between the 2nd and 4th edition sourcebooks suggests that, in the end, it was this second faction, centered in Karlburg, that ultimately gained the upper hand within the cult. While the cultists may disagree on the organization's ultimate purpose, they are united in their determination to hasten the collapse of the existing social order, and they pursue that goal with remarkable zeal. Their members are dispatched to carry out acts of sabotage, such as poisoning Midenheim's wells during the 2520s, as well as assassinations, thefts, and countless other acts of subversion. Some are even willing to undertake suicide missions in the name of the Horned Rat. Before carrying out such attacks, they, however, carefully remove anything from their bodies or clothing that might reveal their ties to the cult. But that does not mean they reject more subtle methods whenever the opportunity rises. Members of the cult of the Yellow Fang also gather intelligence, and those in positions of influence, such as one professor in Midenheim belonging to the cult, shape public opinion to suit their ends. They might publish treaties warning of the supposed dangers of keeping cats, or work behind the scenes to place fellow cultists in important civic and regional offices. All the more remarkable, given that the cult rarely recruits from the nobility, for whom the overthrow of the existing social order is, for obvious reasons, seldom an appealing prospect. The cult's internal hierarchy is highly fluid. Local leaders rise to prominence through cunning manipulation, violence, or alliances with individual Skaven, only to fall from favor and be replaced by someone even more ruthless. In that aspect, they mirror the very society they admire so much. As a whole, the cult is neither directly controlled by the Skaven nor bound to any single clan. Leaders in different cities may cultivate ties with entirely different Skaven factions, making it possible for separate cells of the same cult to unknowingly work against one another. But then again, if one chooses to play the Skaven game. To be fair, the Skaven's distrust of their human followers is not entirely without reason, and it is not because they suspect some cultist of intending to exploit them for their own ends. In Skaven society, such ambition is practically expected. Rather, the Skaven see even their most devoted human servants as little more than tools and subordinates, never as equals. As a result, they do not entrust them with advanced Skaven weaponry, let alone teach them how to use it. On the rare occasion that a cultist manages to obtain such a weapon through flattery, deception, or outright theft, the outcome is almost always disastrous for the unfortunate cultist and for the innocent bystanders caught in the sickly green blast of a stolen warp musket. The Skaven treat the cult's spellcasters in much the same way. There are very few of them, though over the years the cult of the Yellow Fang has managed to recruit a handful of magically gifted individuals. Even so, they can expect no formal instruction in Skaven sorcery. At best, a fortunate few may stumble across scattered fragments of forbidden knowledge, though such cases are exceedingly rare. The spells wielded by the cult's wizards are almost always drawn from petty or arcane magic, yet their manifestations inevitably bear a distinctly Skaven character. Some of the cult's higher-ranking members even strive to reassemble the Skaven in appearance. Naturally, filling one's teeth into points or cutting back one's ears is no small alteration, but for those who hold positions of importance within the cult, devote themselves entirely to its cause, and seek to emulate the god they worship, such mutilations are not unheard of. The cult's more fanatical adherents also imitate the speech of the Skaven, yes, yes, as well as their hunched posture. Some of the horned rat's most devoted human followers even wear artificial horns in an attempt to reassemble him more closely, a practice that would almost certainly horrify any Greyseer. Fortunately for everyone involved, members of the Yellow Fang rarely come into direct contact with the Skaven priesthood. Most cultists, however, prefer not to attract unwanted attention through their appearance. Recognizing one another requires only familiarity with the cult's symbols: a stylized Skaven triangle with one of its lower arms elongated and painted yellow, or a stylized fang-shaped dagger used in rituals and, on occasion, assassinations. Some of the more devoted members bear a small yellow fang tattooed on the underside of their forearm, while others wear around their neck a tooth stained yellow, deliberately knocked out for that very purpose from their own mandible. How much cultists know about one another beyond these symbols likely varies from one local cell to another. Members of each chapter gather in secret at agreed-upon locations from time to time to discuss plans and exchange information. In Middenheim, for example, these meetings are held on the 13th day of every month, attended by one of the senior representatives of Clan Scruton from beneath the city. During the Storm of Chaos, the Yellow Fang is said to have ritually sacrificed one victim to the Horned Rat every quarter. Should no suitable offering be found, one of the cult's own members would receive that grim honor instead. Curiously, earlier sources make no mention of such practices, suggesting they may have emerged only later, when the flood of refugees from the north made disappearances far easier to conceal amid the chaos of war. If the cult truly functions as a coherent organization, then its local leaders must occasionally meet or at the very least exchange information. The Skaven festival of Vermintide would seem the obvious occasion for gatherings of such importance, though I should stress that this is merely my own speculation. The cult of the Yellow Fang is by no means the only cult devoted to the Horned Rat. It is simply the one about which we know the most. In fact, its own descriptions make it clear that many similar cults exist throughout the old world. The Yellow Fang merely stands apart because of the exceptional scale and boldness of its activities. Traces of other cults devoted to the Horned Rat can also be found in the legends told throughout the old world. One such tale speaks of the butcher's son, born with 6 toes on one foot. Rather than reporting the mutation to the proper authorities, his parents concealed it and raised the boy as though nothing were amiss. Until one day, word of him reached a mad sorcerer, a leader of a cult that worshipped the Ratman beneath the earth in exchange for promises of arcane power. The cult murdered the boy's mother and abducted the child, believing him to be chosen by the rat god. They carried him to an underground temple, where during a dark ritual they summoned a ratman who placed a shard of warpstone upon the boy's mutated foot. The cultist then strapped a cage of rats to his back and sent him through the streets, spreading vermin and with them disease throughout the city. As his body continued to warp and fail him, he was eventually fitted with a metal arm and a metal leg. and so he wanders to this very day, one step with a bare foot, one scrape of an iron limb. His father, they say, is still searching for him. Draw your own moral from that very merry tale. Variants of this legend are said to be known across many regions of the old world, with the location of the events always changing to match the place where the story is told. Curiously, however, all three sources I found in the lore placed it specifically in Mindenheim. If so, it may preserve the memory of another cult devoted to the Skaven, one that once operated, or perhaps still operates, in the northern reaches of the Empire. I believe this because the various versions consistently feature warpstone and human worshippers seeking out the Skaven in pursuit of magical power. And that is not how the cult of the Yellow Fang thinks or operates. So just how widespread are these cults throughout the old world? That is a difficult question to answer with any certainty. By their very nature, they are hidden from view. Whether the wider population accepts the existence of the Skaven or dismiss them as nothing more than strange beastmen, dealings with the Ratmen are hardly viewed favorably by either ordinary folk or the authorities. Members of such cults therefore guard their existence with the utmost secrecy, making their activities exceptionally difficult to trace. What we do know is that they exist, and the available sources strongly suggest that they may emerge almost everywhere a sizable human settlement sits above an extensive Skaven warren. And that, in turn, makes them incredibly useful tools for us as game masters, perhaps even more useful than they are to the Ratmen they serve. After all, any intermediary who does not look like a Skaven, but works on their behalf, makes it that much harder to uncover the true source of the problem. If the blackmailer, or the man delivering the bribe, is not dragging its rat's tail behind him through the streets, your players may need quite some time to realize who is really pulling the strings. Though, from experience, I would caution against hiding the true villains behind too many layers of intermediaries. In the heat of a session, players often struggle to untangle schemes that become overly convoluted. Human cults of the Horned Rat also allow you to introduce Skaven plots in places where your players least expect them. After all, who would suspect a servant of the Ratman to be hiding among the faculty of a university? Or behind government desk? Then again, perhaps I would better take that last example back. Whatever the case, human cults devoted to the Horned Rat can make for truly unexpected adversaries. Espionage, spreading panic among the populace, distributing narcotics, kidnappings, thefts, assassinations. All of these are tasks the Skaven can easily delegate to a human cult, whose members will gladly carry them out in their stead. Of course, a cult of the Horned Rat does not even need to work hand in hand with the Skaven. It may well pursue its own agenda while still serving the same ultimate cause. Then again, you do not have to portray them as outright villains. Perhaps, in some circumstances, they might even choose to aid the party. After all, they could conclude that, for a time at least, their goals align with those of the player characters, making cooperation mutually beneficial. Naturally, such assistance would come at the cost of only a small favor, one the cult would call upon the party to repay at a later date. And should the characters refuse, well, there is always blackmail. Another interesting approach would be to present the cult from the inside. Imagine an entire campaign in which the player characters rise through the ranks of the organization, gradually uncovering its secrets and learning more about its true objectives, its hidden leaders, and the Horned Rat himself. After all, novice initiates are hardly ever taught everything about the powers they truly serve. Such a campaign could appeal not only to groups eager to explore the dark side, but also to parties made up of witch hunter agents attempting to infiltrate the cult and expose one of humanity's most insidious enemies from within. Let me know how you would use worshippers of the Horned Rat in your own campaigns, or whether you've already had any memorable encounters with them. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the Radcatcher Tales channel if you haven't done so yet, or leave a like if you're already with us. That's all for today, take care, and I'll see you again very soon.